Namo Namaha to everyone.
Маған этот
And
перспектива керек. Там көремін ішінде. Ага, вот так. Ну, или там, ну, просто мен перспектива көремін.
so Namo Namaha to everybody. Good morning. And to all those on the Indian side, I must say good afternoon because it's already 12. And to all those who are joining us from the other part of the country, so wish you all a very, very good day. And I welcome all of you present here to Sanskriti Samvardhan and Samshodhan Pratishthan. We are on our day 2. Yesterday we had a wonderful inaugural session, and we are happy to have Dr. Laura with us yesterday as well. So we are taking this further. Let me welcome all those present here. We have with us Saptahik Vivek, that is part of our Vivek Samuha. We also have with us Sri Dilip Karamberkar, um, who is the chief editor of Saptahik Vivek and all the other Vivek publications. Along with that, we have he's also the president of SSASP, as we call it, that is Sanskriti Samvardhan and Samshodhan Pratishthan. Along with us, we have the executive president, Dr. Kala Acharya, who is the executive president of this institution. We have several dignitaries here with us, and I'm also grateful to have with us our media partners. We have with us media partners Saptahik Vivek, we have News Bharati, we also have Sri Aurobindo Society with us. Yesterday we had Dr. Sampadananda Mishra from the institution, and today he is also with us. He is also streaming this entire thing live. So thank you to all the media partners. Along with that, we have Hindi Vivek, Tarun Bharat. So on behalf of everyone at Sanskriti Samvardhan and Samshodhan Pratishthan, I take this opportunity to welcome everyone. And let me, with no ado, introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker for today is Dr. Laura Yerekeshava. She is the Professor Al Farabi Kazakh National University, President Kazakhstan India Foundation from Kazakhstan. And the areas of research where she works is sociology of religion, anthropology of religion, comparative religion, cultural studies, history of India, the Silk Route and other ancient trade routes, British travelers, travelers in Central Asia and South Asia, system theory, science and spirituality, and international relations. As you can see, it's a broad spectrum. And to do justice to this broad spectrum, she has a lot of affiliations in this. She has several presentations in the form of publications, in the form of books and journal articles in the journal. So she has, to her credit, books like Intercultural Dialogue and Intercultural Diversity. In addition, she has the affiliations of religion and politics in South Asia, Indian National Congress and Hindu Muslim problem in British India, and several others that are noteworthy. So I welcome on behalf of everyone present here, Dr. Laura Yerekeshava, and she's also been closely associated with Dr. Kala Acharya for several years, and that is another bond that they share. So on behalf of all of us, welcome Dr. Laura, and please go ahead with your beautiful topic from Gandhara to Serindia, cross-cultural encounters and images of the other in Central Asian collection of the National Museum of Asian Art. So over to you, Dr. Laura.
Thank you very much. Namaskar to everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank again. Yesterday we spoke about that. Today also, sincere thanks to organizers, to Sanskriti Samvardhan and Samshodhan Pratishthan, and to Professor Kalachari particularly, with whom I have some special bonds. She was my teacher. And let me start today with a topic which all have already been announced, like from Gandhara to Serindia. What are Gandhara and Serindia? What historical, cultural areas are these? Why we should pay attention? And what, in general, relations and cross-cultural encounters took place in this part of the world. And this today we shall try to see using the artifacts from the beautiful collections which are preserved in the National Museum of Asian Art, Musée Guimet in Paris. And we shall look at this cross-cultural dialogue through the prism of these artifacts. So let's speak today about culture, dialogue, and art. Uh, the contents of my presentation is, as you see here, uh, relates to their space. First, we shall discuss space and historical areas, cultural historical areas of this in general. Then briefly, I will touch upon the methodological stand to give a perspective on from which perspective we actually should talk about that, or we talk about that. So then also briefly, I will mention about these collections of Central Asian collections of National Museum of Asian Art, Musée Guimet in Paris. And then we shall come to the particular syncretism of Gandhara art and of Serindia, how the representation of the other took place, and that will be followed by the brief conclusion. So let's start. Let's start with the first topic of space and cultural historical areas. What are these areas, and why we should distinguish between it? So for me, it looks like very important that the space, generally space of any region, and particular of Central Asia, of course, was directly linked with the time, participants, and events. So without this triangle, we could not identify the particular, or even the same space could be known under the different names. For example, the territory, as you see here, from between Sirdarya and Amudarya rivers, had very different connotations. Like for ancient Iranians, it was a space of Turan. For ancient Greeks, it was like Transaxania or Transaxiana. For the Arabs, it was Mavaranahar. So later in period, same, like a huge Eurasian space up to the Eastern Europe from the Far East. For European travelers had also different connotations, like Scythia, where the tribes of Sakas or Shakas or Scyths lived, Camarnia or Tartaria. Uh, Here in Central Asia region, I would say that it comprises of really various cultural historical areas, and the region is very important because it gives us possibility or so-called case study to understand the cross-cultural interaction, which was really important. For example, earlier I mentioned about different connotations, names of the area, but within the Central Asia area in itself, you could distinguish different in other parts like Turan, Bactria, Margiana, Khwarezm or Khwarazm in different pronunciations, Sogd, Fergana, Jetusu, Deshti Kipchak, or the Great Steppe, Magulistan, Kashgar, or Uiguria. Uh, what relation Gandhara and Serindia have to this region? So it could be said that they form so-called peripheries of the huge region as if they're framing, if we take the region as some frames, so Gandhara from the southwest and Serindia from northeast part were sort of frames which makes this region. And of course, as for the other places, these areas, I mean, Gandhara and Serindia also reflected very specific time, space, and actors. So for your convenience, I took this map from the internet where you could just briefly and very roughly, this is not precise, to see the location of Gandhara. As you can see here, this is a crossroads, a real crossroads of either geographical, either cultural encounters. From geographical standpoint, it is a cross meeting point between huge, magnificent mountains range, like from Tian Shan, Kunlun, Pamir, Western Himalayas, mountain ranges. While from a cultural and historical point, this is a melting point, a meeting point between Indian and Central Asian, and as we see later, Greek civilizations and Chinese civilizations as well. As for Serindia, there is a territory which comprises modern Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of China. And this map, which I have been taken from this digital archive of Toyogun Korei Books project in Japan, is based on the digitalization copy of the map, which had been drawn by Aurel Stein and had been represented in his fifth volume work, Serindia. So here you can see that the region occupies almost the all northern so-called Jungare side or southern so-called Khotan side of Taklamakan, spacing also Taklamakan Desert. And in ancient sources, this area also had been known as Altin Shahar. It means the territory of six towns or cities, which were polis or cities oases, which spread along this Taklamakan Desert. What about methodological stand? It works on the premise which I use here on the types of the main results of cross-cultural interaction with the other. So let's say as there are four main systems, if we see from systemic approach based on Parsons, Talcott Parsons, then we could equally distinguish the same levels of intercultural encounters. On the biological level, we could correspond this to acquaintance and adaptation. When the person sees the other for the first time, he needs or she needs to adapt oneself to the new environment and people. On the individual level, which corresponds to the recognition, understanding, and knowledge, it is here that when we try to understand and to know the other in more details. And on the third level, on social, it is on this level when we develop the types of acceptance and amalgamation, because on this particular social level, which is a relational category, we socialize, we interact, and from this we come to more close relations and understanding of and acceptance of the other. And on the highest fourth cultural level, we see coexistence and up to syncretism. It is on this level when the new cultural patterns develop and takes place. And on this exactly cultural level system, the cultural patterns, of course, they are syncretic, and I call them as a multi-layered in nature. They differ in huge variety of symbolism and includes very various traditions and practices. So here on this cultural level, the perception of cultural or religious other undergoes a huge transformation towards acceptance as an equal member of solidary cultural groups. So today's lecture, we shall speak about this fourth level, when the amalgamation, when the acceptance, when the acquaintance and knowledge transforms into the coexistence and syncretism. So let's try to see this on the sample of the artifacts which depicts Gandhara and Serindia. But briefly before that, I would like to pay your attention towards National Museum of Asian Arts, Musée Guimet in Paris, because this is one of the, not because it is one of the richest and oldest and biggest institutions or museums, but also it is a very huge depository and as a research center, which allows people not only to see, but to study. Here you can see the picture of Émile Guimet. He was a French industrialist who took expeditions, travel trips to the East in 1870s, and inspired by whatever he had seen there and found, he became an admirer of Oriental, so-called Orient, and started acquiring so many artifacts. So his collection grew up, and in 1879, first in Lyon, and then he transferred his collection into Paris. And he ordered also actually a special building according to his vision, which is still could be found in Trocadero in this area in Paris. The museum's collection really rich, and they contains expeditions from famous expeditions of Paul Pelliot in 1906-1909 to Asia, particularly to China, Central Asia. The collections of French archaeological delegations to Afghanistan started at the end of 19th century, and particularly in 1920s and 30s, led by Joseph Hakan, and the French expeditions to Afghanistan in 50s later. So you can imagine that, particularly when it comes to topic of to Gandhara and Serindia, this institution is very important. Here, for example, we could see the photos of Paul Pelliot in a very famous Don Juan cave in 1908, 1 year later after Aurel Stein discovered these caves of 1,000 Buddhas in 1907 in May. So you could see the huge interest of Europeans towards Asian country and history and understanding of their rich culture. Here you could see this unique photo of Paul Pelliot himself, a huge depository of manuscripts and written in Khatanese, Sanskrit, in Brahmi, in Kharoshthi, in Mongolian, Tibetan, and in Chinese languages, which are still under researching. So it has been not fully researched, and the International Don Juan project, it helps to at least to progress in this. Now let's come to the direct syncretic art of Gandhara. Here we could see that, as I told earlier, it is a melting and meeting point between, first of all, Indian, Hellenistic, and Central Asian itself, civilizations, traditions, particularly Bactrian, Parthian, and the whole plots and inclusions of ancient Indian, Buddhist, and Greek mythologies were intertwined and incorporated in one so-called pot. And that has been typologized through the depictions of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas from stories of Jatakas, stories of Buddha, depictions of local gods of fertility, such as Panchika Kubera, Hariti, Pharaoh Ardaksho, Central Asian or Bactrian, sculptures of course, Yakshanis, Gandharvas, Devatas, stories about from Greek mythologies like Dionysus and Hercules, and depictions of Atlantans. So even representing and looking at this list, you could see enormous intermixture of different traditions, which even you could not expect, for example, from far east to far west. And here, particularly as mountain regions meet in this place of Gandhara, equally same, the cultural traditions also interfluence with each other. Here also you could see beautiful heads of bodhisattvas, which are also in the collection of this museum. Like Bodhisattva of Maitreya on the left, and Bodhisattva from Gandhara, all of them attributed to the first, 3rd century of Common Era. And here you could see that Bodhisattvas, if you look, for example, to the Indian or Chinese tradition, are represented absolutely in a different forms, with a more humble, with a more soft, and more with strength at the same type, with the more soft contours. Here the bodhisattvas, especially on the right hand side, are in a very masculine form. They're warriors, they're real kshatriyas, they're warriors which are defenders of the faith. And but iconography of them suggests you that there is huge incorporation of Indian cultural traditions elements, like on this spot and bind on the forehead, like also huge jewelry, massive, which could be seen on the right. At the same time, you could see very generous mustache, and also the attitude of masculinity and defenders, warriors. Here also you could see the beautiful standing Bodhisattva from Shahbaz Garhi, which is a real bright example of syncretism. And its clothes and in symbolism of attire is a manifestation of various traditions which are organically interwoven together. If you come more closer to that depiction, you could see this is Indian robe with a flapping cape over the left shoulder, with the Brahmanic cords, with a depiction of Garuda bird on the top of turban. And at the same time, you could see this depiction was maybe not perfectly now on this, but in original, you could see the depiction of cupids. Cupids, it's also a symbol which came from a Greek art and then transferred into the European up to Renaissance period. And also in this gesture, it's sort of like Abhaya Mudras, which looks even differently. This is Abhaya Mudras of not quiet strength. This is a more open and a more straightforward and defending position as a defender of the faith. It's the master depicted these attributes according to the local standards and style, and these standards and style incorporated, as I told you earlier, in both in Indian and particular Buddhist tradition, because Gandhara was a part of Kushan Empire, which by itself was a mixture of different traditions from Yuezhi tribes coming from the north, from Indian and local traditions as well. So here we have, you could also see within this characteristic folds of the clothing depicted on the one time of Indian tradition, yet at the same time the folds like from Greek art, and also the halo around the head. Next, I would like to talk about another form of representation of the syncretism as the ancient Greek gods heroes Hercules and Aeschylus, as well as Dionysius, which became also very much part of the local tradition, which absorbed Greek myths and legends, and these heroes became very popular, and the myth about them lives not only in India, Central Asia, and even reaching as far as China. For example, here I used the citation from the very famous German scholar Schwanbeck, who was a translator and collected the indica of Megathens of 3rd century BC, before Common Era, and whom also cited another translator of indica by Ariane, by Macrindle. So here in this citation, you could see that for Greeks, when Macedonians came to India, and then after the consequent dissolution of Macedonian Alexander the Great Empire, and when Magadha from Indian and Maurya Empire became, and Greeks became the neighbors. So from this part, from that time, you could see that Shiva, Macedonians on the Greek identified Shiva with the Bacchus. Because they saw a sort of Bacchic fashion of his worship, and because they traced some light resemblance between the attributes of the two deities. On equally strong grounds, they identified Krishna, another god whom they saw worshipped, was Hercules. And whenever they see among the tribes of Sibaya, they saw the skins of wild beasts or clubs or the like, they assumed that, for example, perhaps Hercules had at some time or another dwelt here. So to this time, it has the legends about the miracles and the labors of Hercules after 12 labors he has done in Greece, sorry. Then he also traveled to India and lived there for at some period. And even to some point, they mentioned Swambik that and Macrindle that they set an empire of full Indian civilization. But that is, of course, like exaggeration of whatever they striving to see familiar symbols and meaning in the other. Here, for example, you could see the image of Heracles in its classical European depiction, when this is a half a naked body of Hercules with a lion skin which on his head on the back, and with his club or button which he used. But in Gandhara tradition, the depiction of Hercules transformed. He became transformed into Vajrapani. Vajrapani, who was invisible, a companion to Buddha, became very much visible first, and to local masters who tried to accumulate both Greek and Indian symbolism, he acquired a new symbol. Instead of his club, he started. They started using the Vajra. So Vajra became as a very iconographic in Buddhist iconography and very much characteristic of this tradition became represented in this syncretic art. And Buddha himself, if you see the image with also with mustache, Abhaya Mudra also with a more straightforward, and the depiction of his eyes and attitudes, the direction, all speaks about more real, not only spiritual, also a physical defender and warrior of the faith. Here, in another legends about Hercules in Gandhara, you could see a story from Jatakas when Buddha met and Vajrapani met the Mawa, or haymaker, who offered the Buddha the freshly cut grass. So he also, Vajrapani, image of Vajrapani is much more closer to the canonical pose of Hercules in the Greek art, with his lion skin on the over his head, with he lives on one leg, and still yet he keeps Vajra and not club and button in his hand. Vajra is very prominent. Buddha also himself here uh, is like one of the defendants of the faith, with a huge mustache, with very open, straightforward eyes, and so on. So here you could see the transformation of depiction of those deities and gods as per the local style. And the local style was based on the cultural, cross-cultural encounters. Like if we go to the European art, you could see this Hercules, as here on the picture from the palace near München in Bavaria in Germany. Hercules is intermixed his images with the images of Atlantis. Atlantis also occupied a very important role. While in Gandhara art, for example, you see the depiction of relief from Shari Bahlol, which is now in Peshawar Museum. The Atlantis are keeping the sky, keeping the burden only not from two with one hand, and seemingly effortless, and without applying any efforts, and they're not standing, they're sitting, and they're sitting as per the traditional, as per local, and as per Indian tradition. So here you could also see the variations of the depiction of the Atlantis in Gandhara art. Uh, Now let me come also to another part, cultural historical era of Central Asia as Serindia, and let us see how the interaction and the image of the other have been represented here, there in this part. So what Serindia is, according to Stein, he writes that there is a drainageless belt between the Pameros in the west and the Pacific watershed in the east, which for more than 1,000 years formed the special meeting ground of Chinese civilization, introduced by trade and political penetration, and of Indian civilization, culture propagated by Buddhism. So Stein himself adopted this term like Serind from the French fellow scholars, and he thinks that this term is suited for the designation of this region as well defined by nature, as well as by this historical relationship. To add to this citation of Stein, I would add that while Gandhara is the main interaction between ancient Indian and Greek civilizations, and Serindia between ancient Indian and Chinese civilization, also the local civilization or cultures of Central Asia also influenced on this output, on this production intercultural mix, which became famous in these parts of the region. because to my point, Central Asian civilization as a basic one, which processed the incoming new meanings, which included both Indian, both Chinese, both Greek through Gandhara art, and carrying out so-called cultural assimilation and adaptation to new cultural meanings, bringing them to a common denominator and further broadcasted and consolidating them all as a normative and basic one. Uh, so, based on that, Indian culture influenced Serindia both directly through the symbolism of Hinduism and ideology of Buddhism, and indirectly also through the syncretic culture of Gandhara. And as a result, we could see that in Serindia, even to a greater extent than in Gandhara, there was a more diverse cross-cultural interactions in terms of the number of components, of elements, of traditions, the degree of influence. So taking into account the fact of direct proximity to the Chinese civilization as well, you could imagine the scale of this interaction. So, how Gandhara art influenced Serindia? It influenced through, in the middle of, especially first millennium of Common Era, like an echo from the Gandhara art from the first third century, still continuing to influence Serindia, and that could be seen by already by sixth, eighth, seventh century Common Era, or using the seeing the images, beautiful images of bodhisattvas of different types with diadem, with laurel wreath on their heads, which had been found in such places as Tumshuk, Tokusaray, during the famous expedition of Paul Pelliot in early 19th, 20th century. For example, here you could see the heads of bodhisattvas or perhaps devatas with the laurel wreath from Duldurakur in the state of Kucha on upper part in Xinjiang, which these bodhisattvas still bear a stamp or echo of masculinity and the spirit of the defenders of the faith from Gandhara, though already in a so-called blurred form, in a more transformative form. Like here, bodhisattvas from Kucha, Duldurakur in Xinjiang. But by the beginning of the 7th century, you could see the further transformation. Like here, bodhisattvas from Tumshuk or Tokus Sarai are no longer warriors or some kind of defenders of faith of Tumshuk or from Hada or other places. Uh, as you can see from this picture, they're extremely lyrical and their facial expression are conveyed in very soft and flowing manner, and to such extent that even the materials which these heads have been made of terracotta and not from stone. He also too this but if in Gandhara you could see the bright beginning open straightforward instrumentally emphasized in stone, and in Serindia Buddhism seems to flourish with the new soft pastel colors. The statues and heads are made using, as I mentioned, terracotta materials or earth materials. As such, bodhisattvas from the same place, Tumshuk and Tokusarai, also found by expedition of Paul Pelliot. Here you could see more Indianized elements of decor, of turban, of depictions of the head with a more profound expression of the long type of ears, which could not see in Gandhara, but which is very much part of the iconic representation in Buddhist particular iconography in India. Uh, Here also you could see a fragment of a mural depicting a sermon of the Buddha in a mural from Duldurakur, also in Kucha, in Xinjiang, where you could see more Indianized form as well, whether it comes to the depiction of the faces, of the profile, nose, eyes, which with the lips, and the attire, which, here you could see the images of the other when the influence of various cultures is very well traced in the materials of burial graves practiced in the Shan Empire, that is 7th, 10th century Common Era. I see somewhere sound. If you can please switch off. Thank you. So in these pictures, you could see, for example, the image of the woman, the image of the sitting woman on the left, and the image of the Sogdian body on the right, which have been founded in northern China. They made of terracotta. And what is interesting in the image of the woman, which is her head is covered by the special head cover, it resembles very much the nomadic tribes, and sometimes in Kazakhstan also you could find in rural areas this head cover, which is called kemishik, very much tradition. So it means in China they absorbed also from nomadic tradition as well. Or this depiction of the no in of sorry Sogdian, the famous trading community from Bactria Parthia, which made fortunes on trading with China while organizing the caravans of goods. So we could see this image as represented in the from the Chinese perspective. Here, for example, you could see also another sample of cross-cultural borrowing, like a polo playing, which became also very popular during the Tang period, because the Tang period was so-called um, um, high period climax of intercultural relations because of flourishing of the trade, Silk Roads. So this, you could see there is some girls playing on the polo for whom this perhaps game was very popular. And also, as here on this fragment, you could see the representative from nomadic tribe with a particular, perhaps Turkic Mongolian tribes, who was showing how to play the polo, leading the game. The other beautiful parts of the images of the other are the artifacts of camel drivers, which made also from terracotta. And here you could see the camel driver with all stuff around him, with all wine skins, with all provisions, with jars, with pots and whatever, and beautifully made the hair or fur of the camel. Here you could see another sample of this representation of the other, the Sogdians, which perhaps were so tired during the long caravan marches and routes from one place, caravanserai, to another, that they entertained themselves. And the master depicted this in a very brilliant and picturesque and a very livelihood way, when some Sogdians were even not only playing or singing, but seems like dancing, and not dancing, but articulating while singing, and singing on these instruments. Uh, so, and another beautiful image of the other is panel light, which usually made during on a funeral slab, which depicted the scenes of the Sogdians. As I told you, Sogdian community was very rich, and they were very so-called respected as well, because with them came also the economical flourishing of the empire. And so when the Sogdians, this or that, have been buried and died and buried out far away from his native land in China, he ordered the so-called funeral slab. And particularly on this part of funeral slab, you could see the depiction, the celebration, sorry, by the Sogdians of the famous New Year, or Navruz, or Nowruz, which is very important festival for Turkic and Iranian peoples. And here you could see how the flourishing, how the floral depiction and joy, and also maybe perhaps not very clear here, but also the attires and clothes of the Sogdian procession, once very high ranked Sogdians under the umbrella going on the horse, and the other procession is accompanying him. So these are also the element of these cross-cultural encounters, which are still very much could be represented, and thankfully the humankind is able to trace and found them. And this also is placed in the National Museum of Asian Art. So coming to conclusion, what I would like to say, first of all, that the cultural and historical areas of Central Asia, such as Gandhara and Serindia, became very important and extremely rich manifestation of cross-cultural encounters. And they show that these encounters took place on the very high level, from cultural level, when from cultural adaptation, coexistence, and on the level of syncretism. And also, the development of societies and social groups is impossible with this interaction, whether we would like to acknowledge this or not, or maybe in different stage, in different degree. But also, it gives us a very important lesson that while learning other, the person learns oneself in a very much and better way. So, and this gives us scholars, researchers, gives us very good opportunity to see how these encounters took place in the history, and gives us also impetus to do this cooperate nowadays. Here I use quickly bibliography, maybe for you could be interested, and would like to thank you for your attention, and thank you again for um, uh, Sanskriti Samvardhan and Sanshothan Pratishthan for organizing the series of Sanskrit 12 months-long interactions, and hopefully this could be an emblem and a form of interactions for the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Goodbye.
Laura. Thank you. It was indeed very, very interesting to know this cross cultural diversity and the way you've presented it in a very lucid manner so that it's easy for commoners who are not really initiated in this field also to understand. So that was really nice. Is it If there are a few questions, we could take a few questions from the participants before we request Dr. Kala Acharya ji to speak. So, before that, if there are any questions from the audience present here, maybe we could take a question or two. You can post the question on chat so that it is convenient in case there are any voice disturbances at the end. You may post your questions in chat if at all. Okay, there is appreciation, Laura. There is appreciation for your for the perspective and interest that is there in this topic, and one of the participants has mentioned that as well. So I think since
And also, I just wanted, I forgot to tell from the beginning that my presentation here is based on the article which I submitted for forthcoming books, which is called Canvas of Cultures, which is actually the edited volume following the conference which we had in November 2018 in Almaty, sponsored by the Indian Embassy in Kazakhstan, Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center. And this is going to be published. So if it once it is, it will be posted online or in a PDF format.
thank you, that was nice. We could request Dr. Kala Acharya ji to speak a few words and maybe give her concluding remarks or as she wishes. Unmute, ma'am, please unmute. Ma'am, please unmute. Ma'am, please unmute. Yeah.
Now is it okay?
Yes, yes, you're audible.
I sincerely thank you, Dr. Laura Yerekeshava, for giving us knowledge, not only knowledge, but making us understand that cultures do not collide. Communities may fight, nations may fight, but what art teaches us is give and take, making each other richer than it earlier was. As you said, that there are different there are always the distinct features of art manifested through the tradition of a particular culture or religion. But what happens that, as you said, that then not only just first first come into contact with each other, but they adopt and they take, there is a give and take between them, and then there is an amalgamation. And this teaches us a lot, because as we have seen that Gandhara art is inseparable from Lord Buddha or Bodhisattva, uh, and his mudras, gestures, they are adopted by the culture, by other cultures. And what is important here is that we can also know through these gestures how the focus of religion is changing. For example, if that gesture, which includes the gaze of Lord Buddha, either the eyes are, whether the eyes are open or they are half open, or they are directed towards, they are directed below. So that gaze, if it is directed below, it means that it has compassion for human beings. So from the religion in earlier, not in Buddhism so much importance was given to God at all, but the focus, how it changes, that human being becomes the central thing of religion. And then to uplift that human being from the cycle of birth and death, as you had mentioned it, from some other culture, is important. That becomes important. So karuna, compassion is more important. Or even the position of the leg or of hands. If about hands, we always find that Abhaya Mudra has become more popular in all manifestations of art, because Abhayam is giving protection, protection to each and everybody. So what we can learn from art is that everybody has to be taken care of. We can we can have we can enrich each other through art, because word is important. Manuscripts you mentioned, they are important, and especially of Brahmi and Kharoshti manuscripts, they need to be studied in depth. But as much as these manuscripts which describe all the distinct features of culture, as much as they are important, art is important, because knowledge is more manifested through art,
Mhm.
because everyone loves art and there is no hatred for in the field of art. That's why your speech has given us a new realization, a new vision uh, about how to look towards art, and it was full of information which has also given us a lot of knowledge. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. And we will be happy if there is some study in manuscripts.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor
From the
Kala.
bottom of my heart.
To hear this from you, it's like a really great honor. It's an honor, and thank you. Um, Absolutely right. When we study manuscripts, we see like from one dimension, while we see the art, then we could see this like from 3D perspective. Because art, why art was made? Because art was made to make some answers for the local from the local people at some particular time, to understand, to fill in the request for having something. And while this request has been done by different masters, with they're unfortunately unknown, yet these masters reflected the existing situation around them. So the art is a very much digital, so-called manifestation and digital impression of that dialogue. And also would like to tell you about, sorry, to answer maybe some comments on your notice of the gestures and positions. This is really important. Perhaps I didn't much focus on that in my presentation, but yes, when the gaze of the Buddha, even with the same Abhaya Mudra posture, when the gaze is looking down, and in some cultures almost closing eyes, here you could see the opened eyes, which are accepting the world to defend, like in the warrior, in a physical defendance as well, not only spiritual. So in plus of spirit, and this also reflected that existed traditions and art gives us, though in manuscripts we could not see this. Perhaps for also it was obvious, but for us, so many centuries living after, we could not sometimes find this. Thank you so much for very really useful and rich commentaries on that.
Dr. Sanjay Pandey would wish to ask a question. So may I request Pandeyji to please say, you can word your question, please.
Hello, Dr. Laura.
Hello.
Thank you for this very illuminating, very vivid and interesting presentation. I wondered, you talked about this meeting of cultures, the commonalities between Central Asian, South Asian, and Cynic architecture and culture. I was wondering whether some of these similarities extended to the Mathura art, because Mathura art, Gandhara is a geographical area which is part of South Asian subcontinent, but not part of present-day India. Mathura is something which is closer to the subsequent cultural and architectural and sculptural tradition of India. So the similarities that you see in Gandhara, some of these similarities, are they there in the Mathura art also, which followed Gandhara and which was deeply influenced by Gandhara. Mathura was deeply influenced by Gandhara. So these influences of Central Asia and Cynic, Chinese, Xinjiang, can we also see in Mathura art, in case you have done some study on this?
Thank you, Professor Sanjay. So nice to hear you. I would like to say Professor Sanjay is leading specialist on Central Asia from GNU University. As for Mathura art and Gandhara art, they're similar. And actually, I would like to tell that starting with Gandhara, then Mathura art, the depiction of Buddha became symbolized in the visible form, because earlier Buddha was depicted as symbols, whether it comes to his foot, for his some other parts. But in the Gandhara, and also we perhaps should acknowledge the Volga or Greek tradition, the idea or symbolism of the hero became amalgamated with this idea of Buddhism, because Buddhism was official state religion during Kushan Empire, and also Buddha became visualized in materially. So people could follow and worship Buddha as a real or some person, abstract though, but real, which they could see and touch the statue. As for similarity between Mathura and Gandhara art, also I didn't show this, but there is a beautiful depictions of Yakshanis. Yakshanis, which also very prominent part on general Indian, particular of Mathura, has been also modified in Gandhara art. While in Indian tradition, they were depicted as naked or half naked, with a very depicted and soft forms, and naturally as water, Yakshani touching the trees. In Gandhara art, Yakshani became also more, less sophisticated, less polished when it comes to the appearance, and they're made of stones, and they were not naked even not half naked, they were dressed. And dressed also in this with the folds of the clothes. So it also gives us the peculiarity how the transformation of the Hinduism and Buddhism symbolism from India towards its travel to the northern and northeastern part through Central Asia, and particularly through Kushan Empire, became transformed and became more so-called not from the normative perspective, how it was if we see nomadic perspective as Indian art or tradition, particularly in Mathura. Then in Gandhara, it became more less sophisticated and more earthened, more practically adjusted. Actually, it's very interesting. I'm not didn't study much the further dimension influence of Indian art towards Xinjiang, which is modern Xinjiang. Actually, it was Serindian art in forms of different categories or types of artifacts. Let's say, because you couldn't find Yakshanis there. You in Serindia, you could more see the focus towards Buddha and towards Buddhism in general. The Indianized element can only see visible through the depiction of the faces and features. In some places, like in mural, they're more Indianized rather than local. In some, like Turfan Oasis in Kocho, in what is now today is Khotan, because Khotan was a center for the trade of silk. When silk came from China, from China, through Khotan southern route of Taklamakan Desert, and then there was diversification. One went through the Central Asia itself from to up to the western, and the other route going down. And Khotan also was a meeting point where Indian and Chinese civilizations came more close together. So in Khotan, you could see more Indianized feature than in Gandhara itself, because the cloth, and this is a very dangerous, but passes through the mountain regions. But even the legacy of Kumarajiva, you could see how the legacy of his biography himself reflected these interactions between Khotanese and Indian cultures. So in Khotan, in that part of Serindia, you could see more Indianized feature rather in the other, like in southern part of Central Asia, which is modern today Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, and in Gandhara. In Gandhara, you could see more local elements based on the Parthian and Bactrian local gods and local tribes as well. So, but this is very interesting because it leads us to the question of how the culture manifests itself through different routes. And when, for example, you could not expect to survive these traits of Indian culture in Xinjiang, yes, they are much more found there than in Gandhara itself. It's like a paradox of history.
Would you say that in the Khotan art or sculpture, the influence of Greek or Hellenic sculpture is less, and
Yes.
And the influence of Indian culture is more? Indian culture in the sense of sculpture.
Yes, yes, it is so. There are also some other elements of artifacts which unfortunately I cannot show right now, but let me see then we could trace. This could be traced also in the legends. For example, the legends about the local legends from the same area of Khotan or Kashgar. By the way, they were also depicted by Oriel Stein. And the legends which for him, because he was a specialist, by the way, of India first, and he was looking at the Serindia from the Indian perspective, from the Indian culture lenses. So for him, it was like a reminiscence of the Indian legends. I also could later send you the extracts from this, which also resembles to some extent the Central Asian local tradition. And this is perhaps could be a typologization of that same high role of nature, of elements of nature such as sky, moon, stars, and animal world and the floral world in protecting and depicting the life. And since Indian civilization also gives very huge importance towards role of the nature. Actually, person and the nature are inseparable. Nature is a person is a part of nature, and this element also is shown in that southern part of so-called Khatanese part of Xinjiang, modern Xinjiang.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laura. This has been really very, very informative, and at the same time, drawing us closer to really looking at art, because there are many people who haven't really looked at art from a perspective which is like this, of amalgamation of cultures. And thank you for drawing attention to. I mean, we basically, the intent is to get a lot of people who are not experts in this field to know more. So this session is really helpful for those who probably have been looking at art from only one dimension, but you lent it a different flavor altogether by bringing in the cross-cultural element, which is actually most important. Thank you so much for this session, Dr. Laura Yerekeshava. And on behalf of SSASP, the entire team, I am grateful to you for this session, and we look forward to more sessions. I also take this opportunity to thank all the participants who are present here and who are also watching us live from Facebook. So thank you so much. I'd also like to announce that tomorrow is a session which is going to be, it's not going to be an online session. We are having Quizomania tomorrow. Something light in this session, because culture is not just hardcore research, but culture is also knowing the essentials through simple lighter moments. So we wish to take this in the form of quiz to different groups of people, youngsters, school children, and adults as well. So we'll be sending out the post for the quiz. It will not be a live session. So tomorrow there will be no live session, but we will resume our live session on the 6th, where we'll be having Dr. Libe Mills, who will be speaking to us. So I'm sure I look forward to everyone present here and also your other associates. So thank you so much for this wonderful session. And I wish you all a good day in whichever part of the world you are. And we resume on 6th of August at 11 a.m. Those of us who have this link can continue to use this link. It's a recurring link. So it will continue to remain valid. Only the time will be 11 a.m. So thank you so much. And I look forward to meeting everyone again. Thank you very much.
I also wanted to mention that there is a professor from Moscow, Chimizova Maja. She's editor of new research on Tuva. And this is very interesting region, which we also need to explore, perhaps together jointly, and to make some result. Thank you, Professor Chimiza, for coming here today also.
Thank you, Professor Chimiza. And I think we can get more, we can meet with Dr. Chimiza through you, Laura. So that will also help us to know more about her work. So thank you so much. And thank you, Marilu Rossi, also for being here from your part of the world. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to all our counterparts from India. Thank you very much, and see you again. Thank you. Dhanyawada.
See you.
Namo
Namaskar.
Bye-bye. Namaskar.